In the depths of a Chinese lake where no city should exist, stone lions whisper through the silence, temple bells ring without sound, and the past refuses to stay buried. They say the water drowned it to erase it, but what if it wasn't buried in water at all, but in time? This is the story of a forgotten city that rose without warning, of an emperor who sealed souls in stone, and of a woman who vanished beneath reality to save a world that never truly let go. Some cities are lost. This one came back, and it remembered everything. The water in Qiandao Lake does not speak. It listens, remembers. Beneath its glassy surface, where mist coils in the early hours and fishermen hum old songs to keep the silence at bay, something ancient sleeps, or pretends to. It was the spring of 2001 when the ministry dispatched a low-profile survey team to the western stretch of the lake, near one of the deeper basins. Officially, it was a routine inspection, something about calibrating seismic sensors for the dam authorities. But those who knew Captain Zhu knew better. He didn't do routine. The man had spent 2 decades in naval salvage. Quiet, respected, with skin like old rope and eyes that always looked past you, like he was seeing the shape of your memory. When he was assigned to this routine dive, he handpicked the team. No press, no interns, just silence and control. Among the team was Lian, a sonar technician, 31, barely spoken outside protocol. He was the kind of man people forgot was in the room, until the machines came alive. Lian could read sonar maps like priests read omens. His bunkmates once joked that he could tell a fish's age from the way it moved through a ripple. Lian didn't laugh. He listened. On the 3rd day of the expedition, the lake turned strange. Not the weather. It was clear, sun touching the tips of the forested hills like a blessing. Not the equipment. It hummed, scanned, and pulsed as usual. It was the silence. The wrong kind. Sonar usually offered life, bursts of movement, echo returns of schools darting, currents shifting. But that morning, the feed was flat. Until it wasn't. Lian noticed it first, a low rumble, just under the static, like a breath held beneath centuries of water. He adjusted the frequency. The noise pulsed, faintly rhythmic. A pattern. Not natural. "Captain," he said, pulling off his headset, "there's structure down there." Zhu narrowed his eyes. "Cavern?" Lian shook his head. "No, this is carved." The captain peered at the printout. Edges too straight, corners too clean. They zoomed in. Stone steps. At 130 feet below surface, in a region where no official map claimed habitation, there were stairs. The dive was scheduled within the hour. 3 divers suited up. Led was Rin Tao, experienced and fearless. He cracked jokes as he checked his air supply, teasing Lian about ghost fish. The other 2, Shen and Gua, were veterans. Lian stayed topside, monitoring audio. Descent was smooth. Until minute 6. The transmission turned sharp, staticky. "Eyes on the structure," came Ren's voice. "Confirmed columns. Repeat, multiple carved columns." Lian's screen flickered. Stone lions, upright, undamaged by algae or silt. Eyes open, jaws mid-roar. But something was wrong with the sonar echo. It wasn't bouncing right. As if the water wasn't dense enough down there. As if the city beneath was less real than it should be. At minute 11, Ren's voice grew quiet. "Captain, I think it's a gate. There's writing." Then silence. "Rin," Lian called, leaning forward. "Shen, Gua report." Ren's moving inside. Came Shen's hesitant voice. "Told us to wait." Said he saw movement. Captain Zhu snapped upright. "I didn't authorize entry. Bring him back." Too late. The line to Ren went dead. Lian replayed the last 5 seconds of audio. A breath. A flicker of static. Then, faintly, a whisper not spoken into the comms. Not spoken by Ren. In Old Wu dialect, barely decipherable. He was not meant to see us. Then, nothing. Panic on deck. Zhu ordered immediate retrieval. Shen and Gua surfaced, pale, shaking, claiming Ren had swum beyond the pagoda and simply vanished. Vanished. No bubbles, no sign of panic. Just gone. They said the water had grown cold around them, unnaturally so. Shen described a hum, like distant chanting underwater, low and vibrating in his chest. Gu didn't speak at all. He just cried. The divers were quarantined, examined, and released. But Ren's body was never found. Later that night, Lien sat alone in the mobile control van. The equipment was shut down, the crew asleep or pretending to be. He stared at the recording, rewound the whisper, played it again. The language ancient, but yet eerily familiar, as if the lake itself had spoken. He decided to dig deeper. He accessed restricted records. His cousin worked with the ministry's geological archives. They had scanned the basin before flooding the valley decades ago, when the dam was built. Publicly, there were no settlements recorded beneath Qiandao Lake. But Lien found something peculiar, a scribbled note in an engineer's margin. Stone lions at Sector D13. Eyes intact. Do not catalog. Why hide it? He kept searching. Found an archived blueprint of a village, Shicheng, built during the Han Dynasty, destroyed in fire around 600 AD. But there was no record of it ever being rebuilt. And yet, the carvings they saw? They matched Han's stonework exactly. The lions, the symmetry, even the temple entrance. Pristine, preserved, like the lake was keeping it alive. The next day, Lien approached Captain Zhu. "We need to go back," he said. Zhu shook his head. "The mission's over. They're sending a new team. We saw something down there. The lions. The writing." The captain's voice grew low. "I've seen this before." Lien frowned. "What?" Zhu's face was pale in the morning light. He looked older. 1973, South China Sea. We were testing deep sonar. Found a reef that wasn't a reef. Shapes too precise. Temple, maybe. The next day, my partner disappeared. He paused. "They told me to forget it. Said the ocean keeps its secrets." He turned away. "So does this lake." But Lien couldn't let it go. That whisper echoed in his ears every time he closed his eyes. He was not meant to see us. Who were they? And why was Ren not meant to see them? He returned to the equipment bay and reviewed the sonar logs again. Zoomed in on the frames where Ren entered the temple. In the edge of the sonar scan, there was a figure. It wasn't Ren. Still facing the diver. Its head slightly bowed. Long robe-like structure draping from its frame. And the sonar registered no heartbeat. No movement. No life. But it was there. Watching. The final log Ren transmitted included his vital readings. Lien pulled them. They showed a sudden drop in temperature from 13 degrees Celsius to 3 degrees Celsius within a second. Then the final pulse. A spike. Like fear. Like recognition. Then silence. Lien saved the files to a private drive. He no longer trusted the officials. When the state agents arrived, they confiscated everything. Laptops. Logs. The equipment. They told the team Ren had suffered a malfunction in his oxygen supply. That he panicked. That it was an unfortunate tragedy. But Lien knew better. He played the whisper again. Slowed it down. And this time, the translation wasn't just, "He was not meant to see us." It was longer. He was not meant to see us. But now that he has, the gate must open again. That night, as fog draped the lake like a burial shroud, a ripple stirred beneath the surface. Stone eyes blinked for the first time in 1,400 years. And deep below, in the stillness of ancient streets no sunlight had touched in over a millennium, something began to move. Not swim, not drift. As if remembering how, Lien awoke in the middle of the night, choking on lake water. His floor was dry. His lungs were not. And outside his window, in the distance, the lake glowed faintly, as if lit from beneath, by a city not dead, but waiting. The story spread slowly, like morning fog curling over the lake's quiet surface. Officially, the diver Ren Tao had drowned, an accident, a malfunction, a tragic footnote in a minor government operation. But words slipped past the silence. Whispers traveled in backrooms of old universities, in flickering emails from deep storage departments, Encoded notes passed across dusty desks. There were those who did not believe in accidents. There were those who listened when the lake breathed. One of them was Mei-Lin Su. She was not what most would call remarkable at first glance. A historian in her late 30s with a calm voice and a scholar's stillness, Mei-Lin had spent most of her adult life buried in dynastic records and forgotten dialects. But behind her gentle exterior lived a mind that did not forget, and a heart haunted by a name the government had long erased. Shicheng, the Lion City. She had heard it first from her grandfather, back when she was a child barely able to hold the brush used for calligraphy. He used to tell her stories, the kind of stories that no one else told, the kind that were not in books, about a city that stood between worlds, a place where time stopped when the last bell rang, a city with lion statues that watched the stars and walls that whispered the future in dreams, a city that had been taken by the lake not because it drowned, but because it chose to disappear. Back then, she thought it was just an old man's tale until he handed her a map. It was brittle, hand-drawn, and older than her own family records. A valley sketch with small markers, farms, mountain paths, a river cutting through, and a blank, perfect circle in the center. No labels, no roads, except one word. Shicheng, the city of lions. Her grandfather had made her promise never to speak of it. He'd whispered to her one winter evening when he thought the spirits could not overhear. It did not die, he said. It turned its face from the sun. And one day, someone will turn it back. She had kept that map, folded in silk, tucked in her books, even as she dismissed the stories in her mind. Until she saw the news. A diver missing. Stone lions discovered at the bottom of Qiandao Lake. Undisturbed, untouched, unrecorded. It wasn't the headlines that drew her in. It was the photo, a leaked image showing the lion's carved eyes. Mei-Lin stared for hours, her tea growing cold in her hand. She knew that expression. The curve of the mane. The script etched at the base, worn but legible to those who knew old tongues. It matched her grandfather's stories exactly. And that was when she knew the city they had found wasn't just ancient. It was forbidden. She contacted the ministry. They dismissed her. She pressed. They relented. She was granted limited access under the guise of historical consultancy. But Mei-Lin knew what she was stepping into. This was not a study. It was a return. When she arrived at the lakeside base camp, the mood was tense. The diving team had been rotated. The locals refused to work. A heavy stillness hung in the air, as if the lake had grown tired of pretending to be ordinary. Captain Zhu didn't speak much, but when he shook her hand, his grip lingered, as if he was trying to measure how much she already knew. She asked him one question. Did the diver hear voices? He nodded once. Not just him. She unpacked the map that night, showed it to the captain. The blank circle in the valley. The name no longer spoken. He stared at it for a long time. Then he whispered, "It's exact. Even the bend in the river." But this was drawn in 1864, she said, and the city supposedly vanished centuries before that. Captain Zhu looked out toward the lake, as if it might rise and answer. Then it was never lost. Just waiting. They prepared a new dive. Mei-Lin insisted on going down herself. She had been studying ancient cities all her life from behind glass and paper. But something in her bones told her this was different. The city would not show itself to just anyone. It remembered bloodlines. It remembered names. As she slipped into her suit and lowered into the cold, clear water, the world above seemed to fall away, soundless and slow, like sinking through memory itself. The descent was surreal. Forests of blue light filtered from the surface, then dimmed into darkness. Shapes began to emerge from the gloom. Rooftops, arches, pillars. Perfectly preserved. Not swallowed by mud or silt, not decayed or eroded. Frozen, like someone had stopped time. She passed beneath an archway with faded characters carved across the top. No voices beyond this gate. The pressure grew heavier, not just on her body, but in her chest. A weight of presence, like she was being watched. And then she saw it. The pagoda. 5 stories tall, rising from the bed of the lake like a dream. Covered in moss, but intact. the latticework windows still in place. The dragons on the eaves curled mid-roar. And at the top, a figure. It stood perfectly still, not floating, not drifting, but standing on the rooftop as if gravity still applied. She blinked. Twice. It didn't move, but it watched her. She couldn't see the face through the mask, but her heart slowed. Something about its posture, the hands folded calmly, the tilt of the head, made her think it recognized her. She wanted to turn back. Her oxygen was dipping, but something below the surface of her thoughts whispered, "Go deeper." And that's when her head filled with sound. Not from her comms, not from her own breathing. It was a hum. Low, steady, ancient. Not a song. A chant. She turned toward the pagoda again, but the figure was gone. Just gone. But the hum remained. She followed it. Around the pagoda base, she found a plaque embedded in stone, too clean, as if it had been placed there yesterday. The script was Old Han, and yet clear as daylight. "We locked our time to save the world from ours. Do not wake us." Malin froze. This was no ordinary city. This was a vault. A place sealed not by accident, but by choice. And someone, or something, was still guarding it. When she resurfaced, the sky was gray. Evening had fallen. Captain Zhu helped her up. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. She nodded. "The pagoda, the writing, the figure." His voice lowered. "You're not the first." He brought her to a tent. Inside were sketches, drawings done by the first sonar tech, Lin, before he left the team. They showed the same pagoda, the same plaque, and in one sketch, a face. The figure from the rooftop. It was hers, younger, wearing robes, holding a staff, crowned with lions. The paper trembled in her hands. Her grandfather's voice rang in her ears. "One day, someone will turn the city's face back to the sun." The captain leaned in. "You still want to go deeper?" Mayleen's hands were cold. She whispered, "I don't think I have a choice." That night, she dreamed of the pagoda. But in her dream, it was above water. The sky was crimson. The city was alive. People moved in silence, backwards, their feet never touching the ground. And at the center stood the lion statue, crying, weeping stone tears that fell upward into the sky. When she woke, her skin was wet, not with sweat, but with lake water. And in the corner of her tent, there were footprints, still dripping, still fresh. Malin Su didn't sleep after her dive. Not in the true sense of rest. Her body may have lain still, but her mind descended deeper than the lake had ever dared take her. What she experienced underwater wasn't simply a hallucination, nor was it a dream. It was something else. Something that clung to her skin like vapor and seeped into her bones. When she closed her eyes, she saw Shicheng alive. Not the ruins she had swum through, but the city as it might have been, vibrant, complete, untouched. Streets paved in black stone. Canals shimmering in jade light. Buildings aligned with cosmic precision. But in this strange vision, the people didn't speak. They didn't blink. And they didn't walk forward. They moved in reverse. Women stepped backward across courtyards. Children unran down alleyways. Merchants unpoured tea into kettles. The city flowed against time, as if something in its essence refused to let go of a single second. And above them all, always watching, stood the man on the temple rooftop. His silhouette was burned into her memory. Long robes, an impossibly still posture, a face she could never quite see, no matter how hard she tried. But his presence filled the air with the weight of centuries. When she told Captain Zhu the next morning, he didn't mock her. He didn't laugh. He simply nodded, grim, and said, "I had the same dream." Desperate for clarity, Malin made contact with an old colleague, Dr. Wen Lu, a linguist who had long ago left the academic spotlight to live in obscurity after claiming to have discovered linguistic echoes of nonlinear speech patterns in ancient dialects. Most of his peers dismissed him as a madman. Malin had always thought him ahead of his time. When arrived 2 days later, wearing a jacket too big for his frail frame and carrying a suitcase full of forgotten languages, he listened in silence as Malin described the vision, the figure, the silence of the city. Then she showed him the carvings captured on her dive camera, spirals etched into the temple walls, surrounded by layered characters none of the other scholars could translate. When froze, "Where did you say this was again?" "Under Qiandao Lake," Meilin said softly. "The pagoda near the heart of the ruins." When exhaled, long and slow. Then he leaned in, finger tracing the edges of the photo. "This is a binding seal, Meilin. An ancient one. Possibly Han Dynasty, maybe older. Designed not just to keep things in, but to trap souls." Meilin's blood chilled. Trap them? Why? When looked up at her. Because they refused to die. That night, rain tapped at the canvas of her tent like skeletal fingers. The camp was quiet. Most had left after the second diver reported a voice whispering his name underwater. Only a skeleton crew remained. Captain Zhu, Meilin, Wen, and two silent government observers who claimed to be from Geological Survey but acted more like prison guards. They had retrieved something earlier that day, a sealed canister found lodged in a collapsed chamber just beyond the Moon Temple, so named for the massive stone carving of a crescent etched into its facade. The chamber had caved in decades ago, but the canister, ironclad and etched in similar spiral runes, had survived. That evening, they opened it. Inside, brittle scrolls, wrapped in oilcloth, preserved. When read aloud, deciphering each character slowly. "We, the last of Shicheng, do not ask forgiveness. We only ask to be forgotten. Our city was cursed by defiance, our emperor sought eternity, and the priests obeyed. Now we live where time does not." The scroll trembled in his hands. "This is a confession," Wen whispered. "A curse," said Meilin. "No," said Captain Zhu. "A warning." That night, Meilin couldn't sleep. Again the visions returned. She stood at the center of Shicheng as time folded around her. The sky was wrong, a bleeding red, the stars shaped like tears. She turned a corner and saw herself walking in reverse, her eyes closed, mouth whispering a name she didn't recognize. Then she saw him, the man on the temple. This time he looked directly at her and blinked. The next morning, a message came through from a dive support team operating further east near the lake's edge. They had recovered a diver, not Ren, another man, from a lost crew that had vanished during private exploration years ago. A team the government never acknowledged, presumed dead. The man was breathing, alive, but catatonic, until he wasn't. When Meilin and Wen arrived, the man was upright, strapped to a gurney, his eyes open but unfocused. His skin looked wrong, pale, almost translucent, as if something behind his flesh was watching through. He began to speak, not in Mandarin, not in any dialect spoken for centuries, a tongue that hadn't been used in over 700 years. When scrambled to translate, the man said, "We never left. The city breathes beneath the world. The lions remember. The throne is still warm." Then he turned his head, slowly, mechanically, and looked straight at Meilin. And in perfect, clear Old Wu he said, "You were there when the gates closed." She stepped back. "What does he mean?" she asked. Wen couldn't speak. Captain Zhu closed the tent and spoke the words no one wanted to say. "He thinks you were one of them." The air in the room turned heavy. Meilin wanted to deny it, to laugh, to call it nonsense. But in the stillness of her bones, something inside her remembered. The gates, the chants, the lions, and the man on the rooftop who still had not moved. They checked the diver's oxygen logs. Impossible readings. He'd been under for 31 days. No food, no air. He should be dead. But he lived. "He doesn't belong to now," Wen whispered. "He belongs to then." The camp descended into quiet madness. The observers began reporting vivid dreams. The sound of bells at night, though there were none in the valley. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. The lake temperature dropped 3 degrees in 2 hours. And every morning, the moon carving on the temple wall appeared to shift, as if something behind it was waking up. That evening, Wen made a discovery. He cross-referenced the seal from the temple with lost texts from the Han Imperial Library. He found mention of a ritual, the binding of the moon throne, performed by a line of women known as the Lion Sisters, priestesses sworn to hold back an emperor's hunger for eternity. They had failed. Only one survived the sealing, a child. The texts named her Su Meilin. The tent went cold. She dropped the scroll. Her name, her full name. "This can't be real," she whispered. One looked at her, not with fear, but recognition. "You didn't just find the city," he said. "It found you." Outside, the lake groaned, and beneath the rippling surface, the man on the temple stood and finally, after centuries, began to walk down the stairs, toward the gate. There are dreams that wake you, and there are dreams that wait for you. Every diver who returned from Shicheng began having the same one. They stood in a vast, dark chamber. Around them, stone lions towered into shadow. At the center, a golden lion, massive, radiant, roaring without sound. But as they watched, its surface cracked. The gold peeled like skin, and then it began to crumble, grain by grain, its roars becoming shrill, human. A scream of something alive breaking apart. Each dream ended the same way. The golden lion reduced to dust, bleeding red into the stone beneath. A single drop of blood spreading like ink through water. The first to dream it was a diver named Jie. Then another. Then 5 more. By the end of the week, even those who had never entered the lake had begun to whisper about it in their sleep. The entire camp moved like ghosts, silent, half awake, as if Shicheng had reached into their minds and hung its breath between their thoughts. Captain Zhu changed. He stopped eating, stopped speaking. He stood for hours by the lake, eyes fixed on the surface. Some said he was listening. Others believed he was trying to forget what he had seen. One morning, he packed his things without a word. Meilin caught him at the edge of the dock. She asked where he was going. He turned to her, slow, deliberate, and said only, "The lions don't sleep anymore." Then he left. No one saw him again. Meilin and Wenlu remained behind, alone with the dreams, the scrolls, and the question that had begun to haunt every breath they took. What was the curse of the immortal lion? They returned to the oldest maps, the carvings, the recovered canister, the confession scrolls. But it wasn't enough. Every record they had of Shicheng came from ruins, from half-erased truths, from whispers passed through too many mouths. They needed something older, something personal. Meilin thought of her grandfather. She remembered the stories he'd whispered in her childhood, how he spoke of lion statues that could count years by the way the wind touched their manes, how he warned her never to speak her name too loudly near still water, how he once told her, very softly, "There are places in this world where time doesn't rot. It listens." She searched his belongings, the few books, the letters, the forgotten drawers in the house he left behind. In a wooden chest, locked and half-rotted from age, she found a bundle wrapped in rice paper. Inside, a thin, brittle manuscript. Its cover read, "The City That Refused to Die." She sat with it under the flickering light of the camp's backup generator while Wen read over her shoulder, line by line. It was written in her grandfather's hand, but it spoke of things he could never have seen. Things from before he was born. Before anyone alive should have known the name Shicheng. The first page read, "Not all cities live. Not all cities die. Some, like lions, wait until the world has forgotten how to fear them." The manuscript told a forgotten story. During the rule of Emperor Kong of the Eastern Han, a court of astrologers and architects were summoned. The emperor, obsessed with immortality, had grown convinced that death came not to those who fled it, but to those who acknowledged it. To defeat decay, he reasoned, one must not resist time, but lock it away. And so, he ordered the creation of a city that would not age. A city of silence. A city that breathed in cycles, not years. Where life would not progress, only repeat, endlessly, perfectly. To achieve this, he commissioned the greatest stonemasons of the era to carve lions. 64 of them, each identical, yet each tuned to a different pulse of the cosmos. The lions were more than symbols. They were containers. Time, memory, decay, all siphoned into the stone. Shicheng became a vessel, a still place in a moving world, a prison for entropy. But perfection is a violent master. In sealing off death, the emperor also sealed off life. Children never grew old. Lovers never changed. Wounds never healed. The seasons passed, but the city remained in spring. And so the people began to forget how to grieve, and then how to feel. The priests tried to reverse it. They begged the emperor to end the ritual, but he had already become a shadow. Not a man, but an echo. To stop the madness, a rebellion of mystics and monks rose. They tried to break the lions. One by one, they smashed the statues. For every lion destroyed, the city shook. Parts of it aged in an instant. Stone turned to rot. Trees collapsed into dust. When only one lion remained, the monks realized their error. The final lion was not a guardian. It was a keystone. To destroy it would be to destroy everything. And so they made a choice. They sealed the city beneath the earth, bound it in symbols, locked its last breath in ritual. They drowned it, not with rivers, but with a spell so heavy that even time itself slid off the surface. And in their final act, they wrote a single prophecy on the wall of the Moon Temple. When the last lion falls, the water will bleed. Meilin's hands trembled as she reached the end. When closed the manuscript, slowly, like sealing a tomb, they both stared at the map spread across the table, the sonar prints of Shicheng, the high-resolution images of the lion statues. They had counted them. Only one remained intact. The others had crumbled over time. Some naturally, others recently. The final lion, the golden one, stood at the heart of the city, inside the Moon Temple, staring west. It was the lion from the dreams, and it was beginning to crack. That night, Meilin walked to the edge of the lake. The wind was sharp, cold. She knelt at the bank, and for a moment, she thought she saw something reflected in the water. A face. Not hers. It looked like her, but older, wiser, wearing ceremonial robes she had only ever seen in temple scrolls. The reflection smiled, and then it whispered, not with sound, but with presence. We are not meant to last forever, only to remember what forever costs. She didn't move. She didn't blink. When she stood, the water was still. But deep beneath it, far below, the Moon Temple pulsed once. A soundless tremor. A breath returned. And inside its walls, the final lion shuddered and wept a single tear of dust. It happened in the dead stillness of dawn, just before the sun touched the mountain edges. There was no wind, no rainfall, no storm warnings, only a single, deep tremor beneath Qiandao Lake. It was not an earthquake. It was not recorded by any seismograph. But everyone near the water felt it. Boats tilted. A wave rippled without cause. And then, the impossible happened. The lake exhaled. Not in steam or spray, but in a slow, steady retreat. The waterline dropped nearly 4 meters in a single hour. Trees that had never known air found themselves reaching upward. And at the very center of the exposed basin, something long buried pierced the surface. A rooftop, carved, golden brown from centuries underwater, but intact. A curled dragon motif crowned the ridgeline, and beneath it, windows. Wooden slats still sealed shut. No cracks, no moss. Just a house, standing exactly as it had the day it disappeared. News of the event was suppressed within hours. Government agents moved fast. They issued a statement, controlled dam release. But the villagers didn't believe it. They'd lived by the lake long enough to know what it was and what it wasn't. This was not a natural retreat. This was a warning. When Lu knew it before anyone said it aloud. The dreams had intensified. The whispers, the silent movements in the water, the moon carvings, they were not coincidences. Something was stirring beneath the surface, and now it was reaching up. He decided to dive alone. Meilin begged him not to. She had seen the house too. She had dreamt it as a child, long before she'd ever seen a map or heard the name Shicheng. It was a place her grandfather had painted once, in shaking brushstrokes, and said, "This is where I saw her again." Wen didn't answer her pleas. He just nodded, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said, "There's something I have to find." At dawn the next day, he went under. He strapped a body cam to his chest and carried a backup recorder in a sealed capsule. He descended slowly, carefully, with every meter filmed, every reading logged. The house stood half exposed from the water now, waiting like a memory that had surfaced too soon. He entered through the window, and what he found was not ruins. It was a moment perfectly preserved. The floorboards were dry, dustless. The table was still set, 2 bowls of rice, tea untouched, a paper lantern hanging from the ceiling without a single thread of mold. A child's sandal rested near the door, one strap bent as if just slipped off. Candles sat on the altar, unlit. Time had not passed here, or rather, it had been told to wait. When whispered into the mic, "This isn't a house. It's a memory." As he moved deeper inside, something changed. The air felt warm, and then the walls began to breathe. It was subtle at first, the way light shifted, the faint rise and fall of the shadows. But then the whispers came, so fragile, like the cracking of wet paper. They called his name. Not screamed, not chanted, simply spoken by a voice that knew him. He froze, not from fear, from recognition. Then from the far side of the room, beyond a silk screen, a child stepped out. She was maybe 8 years old, wearing red, with a braid tied by a lotus string. She sat down at the table, turned to face him, and smiled. "May," he whispered, but that wasn't her name. Her name was Lan, his sister, dead for over 30 years, drowned in a boating accident on the Nanxi River. He had been 16. She had fallen in before he could reach her. Her body had never been found. Only her slipper washed ashore days later. But now she sat at the table, alive, smiling at him with the same chipped front tooth and birthmark on her wrist. "Come sit," she said, her voice not underwater, not distorted, but perfectly clear. He dropped to his knees. "I don't understand," he said, choking. Lan poured tea into the empty cups. "You were always late," she teased. "But I tried to save you." "I know," she said, "but I wasn't yours to save." He reached out to touch her, but his hand passed through air. Only then did he notice her eyes. They weren't eyes. They were reflections, deep pools of water, showing not his face but the ruins of Shicheng, spinning backward in time. Lions roaring in silence. Bells tolling without sound. "Lan," he said, "what is this place?" She looked out the window where no light shone. "This is the city's memory of grief," she said. "We're all here. Everyone who was never allowed to be forgotten." The house shuddered. The walls darkened. The candles burst to flame all at once, and the shadows in the room screamed. Lan turned back to him, her face no longer warm. "The lion is breaking, brother." He tried to back away, but the room folded around him. The lantern above twisted and became a cage of ribs. The floor turned to stone, the walls to scales, and the doorway into teeth. When reached for the recorder, "I need to show them." But the house roared, and the screen went black. Back at the surface, the camp waited. They saw his oxygen readings spike, then flatline, then spike again. The line to his mic crackled with static, then one final phrase from his voice. "It's not a place. It's a wound." An hour later, a team recovered his dive gear. One was gone. His camera remained. It had recorded every moment, except the last. The final 60 seconds were corrupted. But in the last frame that survived, Malin saw him kneeling at the table, the child sitting across from him, and in the far corner of the room, the lion statue, its golden surface split, the cracks weeping blood that flowed upward like smoke. There is something deeply unnatural about watching a man's reflection age while he does not. When loose footage, retrieved from the lakebed with trembling hands, was corrupted as expected. Saltwater interference, digital decay, the usual excuses. But Malin refused to accept that. She had it salvaged frame by frame, pixel by pixel, reconstructed by an engineer who'd once worked for deep-sea recovery teams. And it revealed something no one could explain. In the mirrored glass of the tea house, seen just briefly before the screen flickered into darkness, when sat still, eyes open, unchanged. But his reflection grew older. Minute by minute, frame by frame, The man in the reflection wrinkled, wilted, his hair grayed, his face sunk into itself until the bones beneath seemed to press against skin that no longer belonged to him. Yet when himself remained still, breathing, watching, what was reflected wasn't reality. It was something else, something that remembered time, something Shicheng had long since buried. The image haunted Meilin. She dreamed of it that night, the reflection, mouthing words no one heard, aging faster than the moon could set. And behind that mirror, the city, not as it had been or as it now was, but as it would be if left unchecked. A future soaked in stillness and rot. She awoke with a decision already forming in her breath. It was time to enter the Lion Throne, the temple at the city's center, the one structure no diver had fully explored. Not because of depth or danger, but because something in the mind refused to go near it. Divers lost orientation. Others surfaced with their equipment blinking random codes. One man claimed his air had turned to incense, but Meilin no longer had fear left in her. Only responsibility. She gathered what team remained, just 3 now. A geologist, a silent diver named Kai, and one of the observers who'd stopped pretending to be from Geological Survey. The rest had left weeks ago, chased out by dreams and murmurs that grew too close to their real names. Before she left, Meilin reread the final pages of her grandfather's manuscript. There was mention of the throne, how no one sat upon it except the emperor once, and then no one ever again. And of a sealed chamber beneath it, built not for worship, but for silence. A place where monks went to disappear, not die. The dive was long. The lake had grown colder than before. Not by temperature, but by feeling. It was a kind of cold that began in the thoughts and moved outward. The city appeared before them slowly, its rooftops like graves in the silt. The Lion Throne rose above it all, ornate and proud, with steps leading into darkness. They entered. The main hall was vast, with lions carved into every column, their eyes glowing faintly with golden flecks that shouldn't have reflected in the dark. But they did. The air inside was still, not silent, still, as if sound had never existed there in the first place. They passed through to the back of the temple, where a great stone circle lay engraved with ancient script. One had marked it earlier from photos. Where death is not allowed, memory must carry the burden. There was no door, but the circle trembled when Meilin touched it. It turned, stone grinding over stone. A stairwell descended beneath the temple, spiraling into the dark like a throat made of time. At the bottom, they found the chamber. Long, narrow, arched ceiling, lit by bioluminescent algae clinging to cracks that shouldn't have supported life. And there, kneeling in rows on each side of the hall, more than 40 skeletal monks. Each one bowed in prayer, hands clasped, skulls lowered, robes still clinging to bone like memory to sorrow. They didn't decay. They didn't crumble. They waited. But what paralyzed the team wasn't the stillness. It was the shadows. Each skeleton cast a shadow in the opposite direction of the others. Not just wrong. Alive. They moved, trembled, twitched, while the bodies stayed still. The geologist turned to leave. Meilin stopped him. Something on the far wall caught her attention. A plaque. Old, stone, nearly erased. She brushed away the dust. A final confession, etched into the rock by a hand that must have known no one would ever read it. We begged to be forgotten. They came anyway. The silence grew louder. Kai dropped his flashlight. It shattered. The algae dimmed. The room shifted. And then the monk at the far left moved. Not the bones. The shadow. It stood, straightened, its arms raised. And in that instant, every shadow in the room turned their heads toward the team. The skeletons remained bowed. But the shadows inhaled. It wasn't sound. It wasn't motion. It was pressure, a sucking of presence, a vacuum of memory. Meilin fell to her knees. Her lungs seized. The others screamed, or maybe they didn't. She couldn't hear. Only the sound of breath stolen backward. And in the moment before she passed out, she saw the lion statue behind the throne open its mouth. Not wide. Just slightly. Just enough to whisper, "One more must kneel." The bells began on the 7th night after the chamber was opened. Not with sound, but with silence that felt like sound. They didn't clang or chime. They didn't vibrate the water. But everyone felt them, deep inside the marrow of their bones, waves of something ancient brushing against their memories like a fingertip against glass. A rhythm that didn't echo through the air, but through time itself. 3 times each night. Exactly at 2:11, 3:33, and 4:44 a.m. No alarms. No equipment alarms. Just a sensation, a humming weight behind the eyes, a pressure against the soul. And with it, a feeling of being watched by something that once stood tall, proud, and sacred, but now waited in the dark. They searched the city. No bells. Not in the temple. Not in the pagoda. Not in the ruins. No mechanism, no hanging arc, no metal chambers. But still they rang. Malin stopped sleeping. She simply lay with her eyes open, waiting for the chimes. When they came, her breath slowed. Her hands grew cold, and her mind drifted back to places she didn't remember ever knowing, but felt more familiar than her own childhood home. She needed answers, not from mystics or scrolls or folklore, from sound. She called in a specialist, someone who had once worked in acoustic archaeology, a fringe science too obscure to be taken seriously by universities, but too accurate to be entirely dismissed. Her name was June Aoki, and she didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in echoes. June arrived with devices Malin had never seen before, lenses that measured tremors in water density, underwater microphones capable of catching frequencies outside human range, and equipment designed not to hear sound, but to map it as a residue in physical space. She called it emotional sonar. Within 2 nights, June confirmed what the rest of the world could only fear. There are no bells, she said. Not in the traditional sense. These aren't made of metal. Then what are we hearing? Malin asked. June hesitated. You're not hearing anything. The lake is. They sat in silence. June played her the recordings. The waveforms were perfect. Too perfect. Like someone had copied a memory of a sound so many times it had become a ghost of itself. These are echoes, June said, but not from acoustics. From feeling. She laid a spectrogram printout on the table. This isn't a frequency curve. It's a heartbeat. The lines didn't vibrate like sound. They pulsed like grief. June tapped the paper. Shicheng isn't dead. It's dreaming. That night, Malin went back to the lion throne alone. She stood in the great hall of stone, between the columns of silent lions, and listened, not with ears, but with memory. The bells rang, but this time, they carried something new. A voice. It didn't speak in words. It moved through her like wind through hollow bone, filling the empty places she hadn't realized were still mourning. And in that moment, she saw her, the woman in red. She stood at the far end of the hall, on the steps to the throne, her hair braided with gold thread, her robes lined with crescent moons, her eyes the same dark brown as Malin's own. She did not blink, did not smile. She simply waited. Then the air around them changed, and Malin was no longer in the ruined temple, but in the city as it was. Alive. The columns shone with new paint. Lanterns hung from the ceiling, swaying without wind. Outside, voices called out fruit prices in a language she had only read in tomb inscriptions. The sky above was bright, yet not lit by sun. More like memory, and she stood among it. Invisible. She turned to the priestess. "Who are you?" she asked, though her voice made no sound. The woman turned. Her face was calm. "Beautiful, sir." And Malin saw what she had feared since this began. The priestess was her. Not a reflection. Not a twin. But her face, her body, unchanged, only robed in centuries of memory. The priestess stepped down from the throne. She held in her hand a lion seal, carved from obsidian and jade. She placed it on the floor and whispered one word. "Forgive." Malin stepped forward. "Forgive who?" The priestess looked to the great door behind her, the one that had never opened since the city drowned. And from the darkness beyond it, the bells rang again. Only this time they spoke. A whisper hidden within the chime. Words curled inside resonance. You brought him back. Malin staggered. She looked up at the priestess, who now wept without blinking. Her tears were not water, but dust, and her mouth moved one last time before fading. You must finish what I began. The world fell away. Malin gasped awake on the floor of the temple. She was alone. June later told her she had been gone for 5 hours. She'd entered the temple and never came out. Her oxygen tank was untouched. Her heartbeat unrecordable. The next morning, they examined the oldest carvings around the base of the lion throne. Under layers of algae and silt, they uncovered more script. Not a warning, not a seal, a record of a priestess named Su Meilin, daughter of the last keeper of time, who betrayed her emperor to save her people and cursed her own name to oblivion. It ended with a line no one had seen before. When she returns, the gate will open, and he will remember his throne. June turned to Meilin. Who is he? But Meilin already knew. The bells had told her, not with sound, but with grief. The emperor never died. Every archive has shadows. Files vanish. Pages are redacted. Boxes once sealed in state basements disappear as if they never existed. But what Meilin Su found was different. It wasn't that the documents about Shicheng were missing. It was that they had been deliberately unmade. Her search began with a simple question. If Shicheng was real, and if its ruins were truly beneath Qiandao Lake, then why had there never been a formal record of its submersion? The lake was created in 1959, supposedly for hydroelectric power and modernization. Entire towns had been moved, villagers relocated, dozens of structures, some centuries old, swallowed beneath rising water. And yet, in all those government records, there was no mention of Shicheng. Not a single line, not a photo, not a footnote. It was as if the city had never existed at all. And that made it worse. She contacted libraries, ministries, newspaper archives, each time receiving the same answer: there is no record of Shicheng. But a librarian in Hangzhou, old enough to remember the 1950s, took her aside and whispered something that changed everything. They didn't lose the records. They buried them. He handed her a name scrawled on an envelope. An engineer, retired, living in a mountain village far from the lake. His name was Han Zhenyu. Meilin found him days later, sitting beneath a bamboo awning, carving lions into driftwood. His hand shook. His breath whistled when he spoke, but his mind was sharp. He didn't wait for her questions. They told us it was for electricity, he said. That's what we were told to write down. But we knew. Knew what? Meilin asked. That something woke up beneath the ground. In 1957. He paused. 2 years before they flooded the valley. He was part of the original surveying crew, back when the land still breathed air. They'd been sent to assess foundation points for the dam, but during excavation near the valley's center, they struck something. Not stone, not metal, something that vibrated when touched. A black orb, smooth, cold, and buried so deep it shouldn't have been there. We called it the Eye, Han said, because it felt like it was watching you. 3 men went missing that week. Another gouged out his own eyes. The rest signed silence agreements. 2 years later, Shicheng was under 40 meters of water. I never forgot what I saw, Han whispered. That thing wasn't from our world. Meilin sat in stunned silence. She asked to see his journals, his maps, anything he had saved. He hesitated, then handed her a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside, a blueprint, marked with an X. It wasn't the throne room. It wasn't the moon temple. It was beneath both. An old well, hidden in the roots of the temple foundations. One had mentioned it once, in passing. A blocked shaft too narrow to explore. Meilin returned to the lake that evening. June and Kai helped her descend, tracing the sonar down through the throne chamber, through the spiraled hallway, and into a narrow vertical shaft shrouded by silt and coral. The deeper they went, the more unstable the signal became, until the static nearly drowned everything. Then, at 60 meters, they found it. A circular room carved with symbols older than the Han dynasty. Stone smooth as glass. walls that shimmered faintly in unnatural hues. And at the center, the obsidian, perfect, set into the base of a cracked throne, whose back was shaped like lion jaws and whose arms were etched with the names of emperors long erased from time. The eye was not decorative. It pulsed, like a heartbeat. Kai shivered. I think it's alive. June reached out. Or dreaming. Malin didn't hesitate. She stepped forward. Her fingers hovered above its surface. And the moment her skin met the stone, she fell. Not in body, but in time. She saw a throne room ablaze with incense. Priests bowed in a circle, chanting in Old Wu. A man sat on the throne. His face was pale gold, his eyes rimmed with shadow. But his expression was joyless. He raised his hand, and across the chamber, a boy screamed. The emperor spoke a word, and the boy froze. Literally. His skin turned gray, then cracked, then hardened into stone. Behind him, lions snarled, animated, writhing. Not statues, guardians. But the emperor wasn't finished. He pointed to the monks. Each one bowed lower. Each one whispered a name. Each one turned to stone. One by one. Then the throne room emptied. Only the emperor remained. And the eye. He placed his hand upon it and whispered, I bind myself not to death, but to waiting. Malin gasped awake. She was back in the chamber, her body cold, her mind reeling. June held her arm. What did you see? She couldn't answer, because the eye was moving. The smooth obsidian surface rippled, slit, opened, not like a door, like a pupil. The eye looked at her and blinked. In the distance, above the lake, thunder rolled across a cloudless sky. A tremor shook the temple, and from the depths of the chamber, a voice echoed, not in sound, in memory. He remembers. It began as a whisper, not of voice or wind, but of change. At exactly 3:13 a.m., Qiandao Lake shifted. Its surface, once glassy and calm, darkened like spilled ink swallowing color. It wasn't oil. It wasn't algae. It was something older, as if the water had decided it was tired of being water and had returned to something else entirely. By dawn, every stream feeding into the lake had turned black. The air thickened, birds vanished, and fishermen who'd set sail at night didn't come back. Boats were found the next morning, adrift, sails torn, nets untouched, compasses spinning like mad. No bodies, no footprints, just one message carved into the side of a wooden hull. We are not lost. We have returned. At first, the government blamed contamination. They sent divers, drones, scanners. Each returned with scrambled footage or no footage at all. Then came the reports. Locals near the eastern shores claimed to see people walking out of the water. Not swimming, walking. Silhouettes wrapped in robes that hadn't been worn in 1,000 years. Some carried lanterns. Some held lion carvings. All spoke in dialects no living villager understood. One old woman, deaf since childhood, began reciting poetry from the Eastern Han Dynasty perfectly, in a voice not her own. Another boy drew a map from memory. It was Shicheng, before the flooding, down to the last brick. The city was waking. News spread, first in whispers, then in screens. Satellite photos showed the lake swirling unnaturally, like a vortex spinning beneath the surface. The colors were wrong. The temperature was wrong. The physics, wrong. Something ancient was rewriting the rules. And someone was trying to stop it. Malin Su became a name of interest. Too many files traced back to her. Too many unanswered questions. When agents came to her camp, they didn't ask. They ordered. They demanded her hard drives, her notes, her voice, and she gave them nothing. She fled into the hills north of the lake, through forests that once bordered the edges of the old kingdom, where maps lost confidence and roads forgot they were meant to lead somewhere. She slept under pine trees, ate from streams, and dreamed not of lions, but of faces she knew but had never met. Her name was no longer hers. It belonged to the woman in the temple, the priestess, the seal bearer. Every night, the bells rang louder. Every morning, The water grew darker. One evening, while walking a path she hadn't chosen, she found a small monastery clinging to the cliffs. Cracked stone steps led to a broken gate. No signs, just silence. She nearly walked past until she heard a voice. So, ancient, you've come too late, or perhaps just in time. A figure emerged from the shadows of the garden, bent back, thin, wrapped in robes the color of river mist. His eyes were blind, but his words saw more than they should have. He didn't ask her name. He already knew it. I dreamed you'd come, he said, but in the dream, you had already failed. Malin asked him what the lake had become, what Shicheng was turning into. The monk didn't answer at first. He turned, walked to a small fountain, and dipped his hand in. Then he spoke. Shicheng never sank, he said. That is what they want people to believe. She frowned. But the flood, 1959, there are records. The monk chuckled. Records are not truth. They are tools. Shicheng was not drowned. It descended. Malin stepped back. Into where? The monk lifted his face toward the horizon, where black mist hovered like breath held too long. Not into water, but beneath reality. She felt it in her chest, the ring of the words, the weight of them. Like remembering a story your soul once knew before your body forgot how to carry it. The monk sat on a stone bench and continued. There are cities that die, cities that live, and cities that refuse either fate. Shicheng was one such place. The emperor thought he could lock time, that by binding his soul to stillness, he could command the universe to halt around him. But he failed, Malin whispered. The monk smiled. Did he? She remembered the eye, how it blinked, the way it seemed to recognize her. He's still alive, she said. Not a question. The monk nodded. Not as you understand life, but yes, his will lingers. His mind sleeps beneath the throne. She closed her eyes. Then how do we stop him? The monk hesitated. Then slowly he reached out and rolled up his sleeve. His arm was not flesh. It shimmered, translucent. Beneath his skin, water flowed. Not blood, not muscle, but currents, rivers of memory. Because we are already becoming him, he said. We were born of the same current. All of us who touched that city. Malin stepped back. No, but the monk only smiled. It was never about drowning. It was about rewriting. The wind howled through the trees, and far below, in the blackened lake, the throne stirred. The eye opened wider, and the water began to rise. Not up, but out, spilling into time, into thought, into dream, because Shicheng was no longer waiting. It was remembering. The sky was still when Malin returned to the lake. Not silent, still, as though the world itself was holding its breath, uncertain whether to exhale or disappear. The clouds above had stopped moving. The birds no longer circled. The wind no longer whistled across the pine trees. It felt as though the entire valley had been draped beneath an invisible veil, like time itself had paused. And beneath that stillness, Shicheng waited. The water no longer shimmered like it once had. It had turned darker, not black, but something deeper, like a mirror facing downward. A still portal into a realm that no longer remembered the rules of life and death. The city was calling, not in words, not in sound, but in memory. Malin Dove, alone. There were no watchers now. No government agents. No scientists. No crew. No gods. Only her. And the city that once knew her name before her ancestors had ever spoken it. The descent was smoother this time, as if the water recognized her, welcomed her. It parted around her like air, guiding her deeper than before. Past the forgotten pagodas, past the lion statues, broken and bowed, past the temple, past the spiraling stairs beneath the throne. She had been here before, in dreams, in visions, in fragments of other lives that returned with every breath. And now she stood before it, the deepest chamber of Shicheng, a hollow sphere beneath the stone foundations, carved not by hands but by something older than tools. And suspended at the center, levitating in place, untethered to gravity or logic, was the hourglass. It spun slowly in the void, not on an axis, but in a spiral, a gentle, hypnotic motion that pulled the eye and lulled the mind. It glowed faintly, a soft amber hue. Inside the glass, sand flowed upward, not downward, climbing against time, returning grain by grain to the top chamber in a loop that never broke. Malin stepped forward, and the chamber responded. The walls around her began to shift, not physically, but visually. The stone surface rippled like liquid, then unfurled to reveal 1,000 ghostly images. People walking backward through markets, temples rebuilding themselves from ruin, tears climbing cheeks instead of falling from eyes, a child aging into a man, then shrinking into a boy again. The city was rewinding, held together by the hourglass. She understood now. This was no tomb, no ruin. This was a time prison, a pocket of unbroken memory where the emperor had sealed not only his soul, but the flow of history itself. Shicheng had not been left behind. It had been anchored, pinned to a single moment over and over again, never allowed to rot, never allowed to move forward. 1,000 years locked in the same second, repeating endlessly. A perfect loop. And the hourglass was the key. But the glass was not alone. Surrounding it, etched into the chamber walls, stood lions. Not statues, but carvings, 64 of them, each positioned with their mouths open, as though howling silently into the dark. Each one represented a moment, a fracture, a tether, a seal. Malin counted them. 1, 2, 3, 63. The 64th was missing. No, not missing. It had once stood above the city. The final lion. The one they'd seen still intact by the temple archway. The one every dream had circled. The one that was now cracking. She saw it in her mind, the line down its mane, the chipped eye, the stone beginning to peel like drying skin. And now she understood why the bells had rung louder, why the water had turned black, why the emperor's eye had opened. Because every time a lion eroded, reality fractured. And now only one remained. One lion. One breath between Shicheng and the waking world. One guardian against time itself bleeding backward. Her thoughts trembled. She stepped closer to the hourglass, hand reaching out, not to touch, but to feel. But the hourglass responded to her presence. The sand paused, hung mid-climb, then reversed direction. And for a heartbeat, so did everything else. The chamber lit up with golden light. And she saw the city, alive. Not in fragments, not in dream, in full. The sky above Shicheng burned gold and red. Its towers stood gleaming, unmarred. Priests walked in prayer beneath lion arches. Children laughed. Wind carried incense from temple courtyards. And at the heart of the throne room sat a man, not aged, not young, but eternal. His skin shimmered with stone. His crown was carved from memory. The Emperor of Stillness turned. And his eyes carved from obsidian, locked on Malin. She could not move, not because she was paralyzed, but because she had no right to move in the presence of something that had outlived empires. The emperor did not speak, but she felt the words ripple through her. You returned to finish what you began. She collapsed. The vision broke. The hourglass resumed. The sand climbed upward again, and a sound, not of stone, but of grief, echoed above. A thunderous crack, the kind that shakes more than air. Malin scrambled upward, back through the chamber, past the seals, past the dead monks and their dreaming shadows. She reached the temple archway, and there, just beyond the gate, stood the last line, split down the middle, its eye crumbling, bit by bit, stone falling into water, and the ground beneath her began to tremble. The lakebed pulsed, silt lifted, bubbles rose like breath from lungs long drowned, and the impossible began to happen. Shicheng rose, not fast, not slow, but deliberately, like a god sitting up after 1,000-year slumber. The city lifted from the floor of the lake, whole, bright, shimmering with memory. Towers reassembled, pagodas emerged, streets unfurled, and at the center, the temple throne cracked wide. as if it had waited for this moment, as if time itself had held its breath until now. And now it exhaled. It began with no sound, only stillness. The first rays of morning stretched across the water, and Qiandao Lake, long shrouded in black, reflected something that should not have been there. Roofs, pagodas, stone arches glinting in the dawn. A city, not ruins, not fragments, but whole. Shicheng had returned, not emerged in pieces, not risen in ruins. It surfaced fully, as if it had never drowned, never aged, never left. Intact, breathing. By mid-morning, it became the story of the century. Helicopters circled it in disbelief. News anchors stuttered their way through live coverage, pointing out temples untouched by decay, gardens still in bloom, cobbled streets unmarred by time. Specialists scrambled to explain how a submerged city could surface without damage. None could, but more unsettling than the city itself were its people. They were there, moving, walking, dressed in Han robes, carrying baskets of fruit and scrolls, speaking in tongues not heard for 1,000 years. But they did not acknowledge the modern world. Not the cameras, not the circling drones, not the observers yelling through megaphones from boats on the edge of the lake. They acted as if nothing had changed, as if they were still in their own time. Or perhaps time was now theirs. Shicheng wasn't simply alive. It was awake. And Meilin Su, the only one who knew why, stood on the lake's edge, her reflection flickering like firelight beneath her feet. She walked forward into the shallow waters where the last ripples met the new stone. No guard stopped her. No citizen stared. They stepped aside, as though they had been waiting. She passed a baker carrying loaves as if the day were ordinary. He bowed without looking at her. She crossed a courtyard where musicians played without touching their instruments, the sound coming not from strings, but from memory. A child placed a lily at her feet. He whispered, "You've returned." And when she reached the lion throne, the great stone seat at the temple's heart, the priesthood stood in formation. Not robed men, but shadows wearing the shape of men. Eyes blank, breathless, yet loyal. They bowed in perfect silence. And one stepped forward with a crown made of lion teeth and silver branches. He placed it on Meilin's brow and said a single phrase, spoken in Old Wu, which she somehow understood without translation. "You kept your promise." Meilin did not remember making a promise, but her blood did. She climbed the throne without hesitation. Each step felt like stepping deeper into a story too old to be written, too real to be myth. And when she sat, the city exhaled. A pulse moved through the stone beneath her feet. Lions roared, not in sound, but in vibration, echoing through the bones of the buildings, through the water surrounding them, through the air itself. The priests knelt. The people stilled. Two paused. And Meilin, her crown heavy and her breath caught in her throat, finally understood what had always been expected of her. She placed her hand on the carved armrest of the throne. It responded. A crack formed beneath it, faint at first, then widening like a slow yawn. The throne trembled beneath her, not with collapse, but awakening. Stone tendrils rose from the base and coiled around her wrists, not with violence, but reverence. Like the embrace of something old, something sacred, something final. And in that moment, she remembered everything. Not in words, not in images, but in sorrow. The first time she had sat on this throne, she had not been Meilin. She had been the last priestess of the seals, a girl chosen by the lions to hold time still. She had watched the emperor collapse into madness, had sealed his soul beneath the hourglass, had locked a city full of innocent people into a prison of memory to save the world from his unending hunger. And she had promised to return when it was time to end it. Now she had returned, and the hour had come. The lions had waited long enough. The city had remembered long enough. And the emperor had dreamed long enough. The air thickened around her. The light above dimmed. Shicheng shuddered. The people began to cry, not in fear, but in knowing. This would be their second death. But this time, it would be the right one. The throne began to close. Stone formed around Meilin's waist, arms, her chest. Still, she did not struggle. She looked out over the city, this city that had refused to die for so long, and whispered the words that had been waiting to be spoken. For the city to sleep, one heart must break. And then the stone sealed shut. The lake was empty. Qiandao, once deep and dark and unfathomable, now rested flat and shallow beneath the morning sun. No city, no towers, no throne, only water and silence, broken by the slow churn of government boats and the distant hum of disbelieving news drones. Where once a city had risen, complete, impossible, breathing, now there was only stillness. Officials stood before cameras and called it an illusion, a natural phenomenon, an elaborate hoax fueled by myths and misunderstanding. They showed footage, grainy, incomplete, scrubbed of context. They shut down broadcasts, restricted journalists, recalled sonar scans. They said the city had never existed at all, that it had been a trick of the light, a disturbance, a confusion of sediment, of memory, of mass imagination. And the people? They believed, or at least they chose to. Because believing the alternative, that a living city of stone had truly risen from the depths, spoken to the living, crowned a woman born of memory and sacrifice, that was too much. Meilin Su was never found. Her name, once whispered by scientists and seekers, vanished from the news as if it had never been printed. Her documents were deleted, her footage sealed, her colleagues silenced, her home in Hangzhou repossessed. The work of a lifetime undone in days. Only those who had stood close to her, Jun, Kai, the monk, the villagers who saw people walk from the water in robes made of centuries, only they remembered. And they did not speak. 4 months, the surface of Qiandao Lake remained unnaturally still. The wind passed over it but did not stir it. The water temperature hovered steady, indifferent to season. Divers who tried to reach the lakebed found it had deepened beyond any instrument's reading, as though something enormous had left and taken the bottom with it. And then, the lions began to appear elsewhere. It started in Canada. Satellite photos of a glacial lake in British Columbia caught something strange under the ice, a stone carving. Weathered, faint, but unmistakably a lion's head, facing west, jaw open. In Egypt, a floodplain dried for the first time in 50 years. Beneath the silt lay a plaza, not Roman, not pharaonic. In the center stood 2 broken lion statues, each turned toward a central dais. In Norway, a child swimming in a fjord found a pendant, circular, carved with a spiral and the same ancient character etched above the gates of Shicheng. Lion. At first, the stories were dismissed. Coincidence. Misinterpretation. Ancient civilizations reused motifs. But the lions kept appearing. In lakes. In riverbeds. In long-forgotten springs hidden in mountain ranges. They all faced in the same direction. Towards something no one could find. And always, they appeared in pairs. Except one. In northern Mongolia, a satellite caught a new shape after an earthquake shook loose the soil of a buried valley. One lion, alone, cracked down the middle. It's right, I'm missing. It was the same statue, the one Meilin had seen before Shicheng rose. And now it stood in a place thousands of miles away, as if the city had not been destroyed, but moved, relocated, or perhaps folded back into wherever it came from. Back into memory, back into dream, back into the mirror. Years passed. Shicheng became a mystery again. Its name, a whisper in the dark. Tourists came to the lake but found only empty water and shallow legends. Time moved on, as it always does, until one spring morning in a village far from Qiandao, a child walking along the banks of a flooded river found something half buried in the sand. A small wooden box, strange in shape, its sides etched with curled symbols that pulsed faintly when held in the sun. It had no lock, no hinge, just a seam. When the child opened it, there was no treasure, no sound, only a mirror. And folded beneath it, a single map. Old parchment, with no countries, no borders, only rivers, mountains, and lakes. One near the Alps, one in South America, another in New Zealand. And at the center, a perfect circle. No label, no lines, just one word, written in the oldest ink, in a language no one should remember. Return. Some who saw it thought it a warning, others an invitation. And somewhere beneath the world, beneath water, beneath stone, beneath time itself, the lions turned their heads. The throne stirred, and the priestess, wherever she had gone, kept watch. Because some cities die, some forget, some remember too well. As the mist returns to Qiandao Lake and the last echoes of the lions fade into the silence of forgotten waters, we are left with a question that refuses to vanish. What if the past never truly passes? What if cities don't die, but dream? Somewhere out there, beneath rivers that no longer run and mirrors that remember, stories like Shicheng still breathe. They wait, not in books or museums, but in shadows, in ruins, in reflections we dare not stare into too long. If this tale stirred something ancient in you, a whisper, a pull, a chill down your spine, then follow it. Because the world is full of cities that were never built, of maps that lie, of echoes that aren't echoes at all, but warnings or invitations. And this is only the beginning. Subscribe now if your heart dares wander. Like this story if it found you in the stillness. Comment below, tell us what you saw or what you remember. Share this tale so others may hear the bells beneath the silence. Because some stories vanish, some are buried,